Here's our Love at First Sight theme song, Right by Your Side by the Eurythmics. God, I love this song. I forgot to play it last time, so I'm making sure to get it in. I love that song. I mean, it is everything a love song should be. It is joyful, it is passionate, and it is filled with conflict, which is what we're going to be talking about this week. First, let me introduce myself for those of you who maybe are watching this vlog for the first time and just happen to click on this episode. My name is Victoria Dougherty, and I am historically a Cold War historical thriller writer who is endeavoring to write a great epic romance series. I've just finished the first draft, well, second draft of my first novel in this series, sent it off to my editor, and now I am in the editing process. And one of the things that I do, my process as a writer, and every writer is different, is that I come up with the big idea, the sort of big theme, big plot. I just sort of write through it. But all of the magic for me happens in the editing process. That is where I ramp up the humor, ramp up the passion, ramp up the conflict, and really, put the magic into the story and make it come alive, and hopefully just grip the reader and grab them by the lapels and drag them into the world that I've created. And so I'm in that process right now. And one of the things I do in terms of conflict, because obviously, I mean, I think conflict is hugely important. Who doesn't? I mean, conflict brings life to a story. Even if you have wonderful characters and an interesting plot, if the conflict isn't there, page after page, scene after scene, it can be a little bit like, limp lettuce. And you do not want that to happen, right? You want your reader to be vitally engaged. Now, when I say conflict, I'm not necessarily talking about physical violence. We don't have to, turn our stories into a dystopian nightmare for them to be interesting. But it's really going through it segment through segment, segment per segment, and figuring out, what is the conflict here? What is the worst possible thing that could happen to my characters or another character in this scene? And again, that does not have to be that the character is shot. It can be an interpersonal conflict. It can be a disruption in their lives, whatever it is, because one of the things that is so incredible about conflict and why it is so crucial to get it right in a story is because conflict isn't just about excitement and aggression and violence. It's a change agent. Conflict is a huge change agent, both in our own lives, and in the lives that we create for our characters, the worlds we build for our readers. Conflict can make you run off and join the Navy. It can make you run off and marry the wrong person or the right person. It can do so many different things that bring change into your life, and change is violent. It's disruptive. We resist it, and I think often as writers, we resist conflict because that's sort of our nature as people. Very few people are the types of people who rush into conflict and love conflict. For most of us who are writers, we have to train ourselves to do this. I always like to use a sort of personal story to illustrate the way conflict can really change a situation and change your perception of a situation. And I want to tell a story that happened in my own life. I like to bring those stories into my own stories too, kind of think back about, what has happened in my own life that I could bring to this story. And I, I was living in Europe a few years ago, many years ago, actually, at this point, and I was uh, friends with this Czech woman, and she invited me to come over to her house for dinner. And she had also invited a friend of hers, who was this Serbian woman about our age, and and I was excited to meet her because I was always looking forward to meeting new friends, and I really liked this friend, and so I figured that I would like anyone that she brought over to meet me and invited into her home. And we were sitting at this very small sort of cafe table. It was not like your typical uh, dining room table, or even, sort of like kitchen eating area table, where there's some distance between you and the other diners. This was small, it was intimate, it was in your face. And from the get go, this woman was extremely aggressive towards me. It was really odd. I mean, I could have said, please pass the salt, and she would have done it in a very sort of forceful and mean, actually, way. And it really kind of shocked me at first. I was very surprised by it, especially since this wasn't happening, anywhere at a bar or whatever. It was happening in this supposedly very friendly environment. And she just kept going after me and kept going after me, and she started just snarking at me, and a lot of it was directed towards my being an American and towards America. Now, I'd been living in Europe for a while at that point, for about 3 years, and so this wasn't something that would surprise me or that I wasn't used to. I mean, one of the things about being an American and living abroad, if you've never had that experience, is that, I mean, we're sort of like, we're treated in a way like celebrities. And hang on there. What I mean is, people think they know us. People have been watching our television and watching our movies, and they have been immersed in our culture, and we're always in the news, and we're such a focal point that people think they know us the way they think they know Britney Spears. But more often than not, they jump to some pretty far out conclusions that are just wrong. And it's very difficult to convince them otherwise, because they are so sure that they know what they're talking about, because, they have been watching us since, since they were very young. And that was what was happening with this woman. And this was also during the time of the Civil War in Yugoslavia and the genocide that was going on there. And so I felt that her criticisms of my country were pretty rich. And so finally, I just snapped. And I went off on her. And it was one of those rare situations. In fact, I think this is the only time it's ever happened to me like this, when I was so on point, I was so articulate, and I just said everything that I wanted to say, and everything that I would have been kicking myself that I hadn't said later on. You know how that happens to us when we get into a conflict with someone later on. We're like, I wish I'd said this. I wish I told her or him that. And in this, very unusual circumstance, I said everything that I wanted to say, and I don't even remember what exactly my monologue was, but I do remember the last sentence. I said, why don't you bury the corpses in your own backyard before you go digging in mine? And well, the dinner party ended pretty soon after that. I mean, we were already on dessert at this point, so at least I waited till the end to snap. But um, the next day, I was walking to work, and I was feeling really conflicted about how I had responded to this woman the night before. I was feeling really bad about it, actually. I thought I should not have let her goad me into that response, which I felt was very impolite. I mean, I wasn't mad at myself for sticking up for myself. I had every right to do that, but I'd done it in someone else's home. I mean, if it had been my home, that might have been different. I don't know. I could have just thrown her out, whatever it was. But I was feeling very ashamed of myself, and so I'm walking down Old Town Square in Prague, wrestling with this, and I hear someone calling my name, and it's a woman. And I look up, and there is this Serbian woman, and she's standing there with a friend of hers, and she's waving, saying, Victoria, Victoria. And I thought, oh my God, there's got to be another Victoria around here. She can't possibly mean me. And she starts running towards me, and she's dragging her friend along. And she stops right in front of me, and she says to her friend, she says, oh, I want to introduce you to my new friend, Victoria. She's the only cool American I've ever met. I was just shocked. I mean, that was not the response that I expected. That was a complete 180-degree turnaround of the situation that I thought I'd been a part of. And what was so interesting about it was that she wasn't, expecting an apology from me, and she certainly wasn't offering one from her end. She just, she came out of what I thought was a really nasty exchange between us, thinking that, yeah, that's the way it should be. That was great. I'm sick and tired of Americans not standing up for themselves and not saying something back when I'm saying this. I'm tired of being condescended to that way. You know, she wanted me to take her on, and just thought that was so interesting. And that is the spirit with which I want to approach conflict in every part of my story. How can we use conflict for change and for violence and for passion? Because conflict is very passionate. Um, Especially, you know, I think romances thrive on conflict. Obviously, you don't want your characters at each other's throats because that's tiresome. It's boring. You want the conflict to be coming at them and coming from within them and just, you know, circling around them constantly, so that you never feel like you can take a breath except perhaps during a love scene. But even in those, I think that there is room for some manner of conflict, whether that is breathlessness and nervousness, or passion, like I said. Because um, now, one of the things I think that we do have to be conscious of as we are going through our story segment by segment, and keeping in mind that conflict, I think more than any other thing, is such an agent of change, is that it can sort of lead you down some rabbit holes as a writer. And if you leave them in there, it can take you down some rabbit holes as a reader and take the focus away from the main story. And that is something that we really do have to guard ourselves against, because sometimes it's very appropriate to bring that into the story, to maybe even change the nature of the story, maybe even end up changing the end of the story or the trajectory of the story, because you realize through conflict that this immense change has happened to your characters or to your plot or whatever, and you think, no, I've got to follow this. But very, very important to be careful. I have been derailed so many times as a writer by going down the wrong rabbit hole, and frankly, as a reader, I think that if you are, you have to be a very, very skillful writer to take your reader off the main story into a little side story and then bring them back again. Now, those side stories definitely belong in a story. They give texture and an atmosphere to a story. Certainly, you don't want the story to be a one note, but at the same time, we must use caution with conflict, just like we must use caution with it in our own lives, so that we don't end up, in a fist fight with someone. So that is about it for this segment of Love at First Write. I'm not sure what we're going to be talking about next time. I really want to revisit men again. I want to revisit characters again, and what makes compelling lovers, and what makes for passion. And we will probably bring discussion of the editing process into that, as well as we will intermittently through this. But I will see you next time, and thank you.